Okay. Good morning, everybody. The Midnight Library. Yay! I'm so happy to have read this book, and I can't wait for all the questions and to hear how you guys answer them. But more importantly, I can't wait for our facilitator, Tracy Caruso, to guide us along this amazing story. It was one of her brilliant choices this season to read. So thank you, Tracy, and welcome.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy Caruso. I know that I met some of you last time, but not all of you. And I'm really, really happy to be back. I love reading. I told a little bit about myself last time, and I'll just mention this again that I have a book club that I started during COVID. Now it's been almost 2 years, and that's gone really well. And I think that book clubs are a great way to connect with other people and to expose yourself to things that you might not normally read on your own, and you get a surprise as to what it could be. It opens your mind, and the thing about the Midnight Library is I really think that this book was just really eye-opening, and it will lead for a great discussion. So I'm going to lead into some information about the Midnight Library, and then we'll go straight into discussion, because I really think that this book in particular really will benefit from what all of you have to say about it, because the best thing about this book was how much it really makes you think about yourself, your own life, and the people around you. I think we could probably all agree with that. So The Midnight Library is a dazzling novel about the choices that go into a life well lived. And it's from the internationally best-selling author, Matt Haig. Midnight Library falls into the categories of science fiction, fantasy fiction, and now one of my new favorites, philosophical fiction. There was a lot of philosophy in this book as a guiding principle to how Nora Seed led her life. Somewhere out beyond the edge of the universe, there's a library that contains an infinite number of books, each one the story of another reality. One tells the story of your life as it is, along with another book for the other life you could have lived if you had made a different choice at any point in your life. While we wonder how our lives might have been, if we had a chance to go to the library and see for yourself, would any of these other lives truly be better? And that's what we explore with Nora's Seed in the Midnight Library. As we know, in the beginning of the book, she tries to commit suicide. She's very unhappy in her life, and she ends up in a sort of in-between place. And her version, as we kind of later come to understand, that she sees a version of this library because it was a place that she took comfort in her life, and a woman named Mrs. Elm, who had been kind to her in her life and had worked in the old library when she was growing up. So Mrs. Elm is the kindly guide of the library that helps her navigate where she is now. She has a choice to go back into the Book of Regrets. Sorry about my dogs. They do this sometimes, and I'm having work done in the house, and that's what they do sometimes. So they, stop it, Spanky. So that's Spanky and Darla, like the little rascals. Those are the dogs. So Nora is in there trying to learn about different things that she could do in her life, and where that can go for her next. And as we know later on in the book, she meets her real life is referred to as her root life, and the lives that she tries on there, she slides into them. There's sliders, and she does meet somebody else in this book who is a slider as well. And he sees, instead of a library, it's a video store with his Uncle Phil as the guy who's his guide. So they come to understand it as something that their minds really can't understand, and that they're given a place that they have an understanding from, that they felt comfortable in their life with a person to guide them that they trust and felt comfortable with their life. It's a very intriguing and interesting concept. And beside the fact that it goes into the whole philosophical, it goes into the whole ideas of, it makes me think of other things such as parallel universes. And I'm going to be curious to see what you guys think of it. So in the Midnight Library, Matt Haig's enchanting novel, Nora Seed finds herself faced with the decision of what life she's going to live. Confronted with the possibility of changing her life for a new one, following a different career, undoing old breakups, realizing her dreams of becoming a glaciologist. She must search within herself as she travels through the Midnight Library to decide what is a truly fulfilling life and what makes it worth living in the first place. Is her root life the one that she should live? Is it the right one? Or does she live in one of the ones she slides into? Nora does learn the meaning of life through her experiences, which I think we all do. She ends up cherishing the life she almost gave up on. She chooses the root life. The only life worth living is her root life. She has learned that life is about how one perceives it, which is a very interesting philosophy, and I agree with that fully. She feels gratitude for being alive, and she determines to embrace life on her own terms rather than trying to live solely for other people. The book fittingly ends with Nora playing chess with Mrs. Elm. And it's very life affirming. She says, no one knows how the game will end. So life's beauty is in knowing that no one knows what's really going to happen, which is, it really is part of the beauty of life. So Matt Haig is the author of this book, and he's also the author of other books such as Reasons to Stay Alive, Notes on a Nervous Planet, How to Stop Time, and several award-winning children's books, which surprised me. I didn't know that. And his work has been translated into 30 languages. So with that being said, I want to go into discussion. We didn't get as much as I would have liked to for our last meeting, and this one had so much. So I want to start with that the Midnight Library is different for each person who enters it. Nora experienced it as a library, as we were saying, because of her meaningful relationship she had with Mrs. Elm, her childhood school librarian. Hugo, that's the slider she meets during the story, explains that every moment you live your life, with every decision you make, you enter a new universe. Later, we learn that Hugo experienced it as a video store with a cherished uncle instead of a librarian. What do you think your Midnight Library would be? And who would be there to guide you? Did anyone think about that when they were doing that? Tammy, sure, go ahead. Oh, I can't hear you. No sound.
So everybody, if you need to be unmuted, you can unmute yourselves, or I can unmute you. But actually, I had no idea till you told me this. That's how the library worked. I thought for me it would be the library as well. So I mean, this is the first time I'm even figuring it out that if I have something like this, it's not a library. It could possibly not be a library for me. So that. It could be anything. So I don't know how many of you didn't realize that, but that's me. I had no clue. But if you wanted, so did everybody understand, or you guys were like me that everybody has a different library, or not even a library? Mrs. Levitan?
Well, I was just going to say, oh, okay.
No,
go
keep on
ahead,
going.
Norman. Norman, you go ahead.
No, I'm just saying that everybody has their own individual library. And the one I would choose for myself is the one I've been leading all along, because of the variations of lives that you might be able to lead. It is not necessarily the most comfortable one and the most one that fits you as an individual and your personalities. So to me, my life as an individual is the one I would always want to lead.
So you'd always want to live your root life. Does anyone have a person that they think of themselves, like if you had your own Midnight Library or a video store, it doesn't matter, where you could choose these things, who would be the person who would guide you? Is it like for me, I think it would be well, now my parents are gone, so it would probably be my father. I used to go to him for everything. So my father, I think, would be the one who would guide me through the Midnight Library. But does any one of you have an interesting, like somebody that like pops into your mind? Mrs. Schneider? Sound
Can you hear me? Okay, great. I had lost recently in the last couple of years, a very dear friend, but she would have definitely been the one that would have been the one to guide me, that I could go to. And she opened up so many roads in my life, so many different choices for me to make. And I could see myself on the Long Island Railroad with her. And as she would be taking me to these different experiences and different ways of choosing my life, I could see that she would be the one to guide me, and I would approach all those different universes right on the Long Island Railroad.
I love it. So like, so you'd be on the road and you would just, the doors would open up and you would open up into this alternate life. That is
Exactly. With her, Tracy, guiding it, yeah.
with her. Mrs.
Mrs.
Better?
Levitan, what did you want to say?
Sorry.
Well,
Emily
it's
seems-
all right. Yeah, let other people speak. It's all right.
Tammy, I'm
She
gonna let
called
you.
on Mrs. Better.
I can't see I can only see
Yes,
like
she is.
once. So, so Tammy, I'm gonna let you call on people. I'm sorry.
Okay. Mrs. Soto?
Okay, I never thought of an individual or a place until you said it right now. But I thought of so many situations in my life where I could have gone this way or that way.
Mhm.
I'm
Mrs.
going to
Better?
say something now.
Yes.
This is the charm of this book, Midnight Library, because it makes you think about your choices in life.
Mhm.
And well, first of all, I'd like to say one thing about the book. I thought I was reading a dystopian novel.
Mm.
And I didn't realize, and then I did, because somebody had once said that these young authors, this was the kind of book that they were presenting now. And it appeals to that demographic. But then I realized, after I did a little bit of reading, that this novel actually can be read on so many different levels. If you want the science fiction, read it as science fiction. But I think when we get to a certain age, we realize that we've all made choices. And I know personally, I sometimes say, now, what if I would have done whatever the choice? But life is such that I've come to realize that I would have ended up doing exactly what I'm doing. And I guess this is where I lined up with Matt Haig and the ending. But I want to point out that someplace along the line in all of my readings, somebody pointed out that any one of us could marry 3 people. There were 3 people out there. And I think marriage is one of those choices that is life altering. So this is why I mention it. And that they would be absolutely suitable. But the choice that we made at that moment, I'm not making a comment on marriage. I'm just pointing out that other people have been thinking like this too. The choice that we make at that moment, when we agree with the first choice, or maybe the second, who knows, leads us back to Matt Haig in the sense that you are who you are and you can't escape it. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that he was suicidal.
I didn't even know that.
Mrs. Better?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. First of all, the library was a place when I was a little girl that I loved. We went to the library all the time. We went one week, took out 8 books, went the next week, read them, wrote back, got more books. It was a place of really excitement. It was my place, but I didn't think of that. I had 2 instances reading the book, and I thought of it in the different, and it was marriage. There were 2 people. One was a guy that Rachel Maddow put in her book because he wrote for the Wall Street Journal, and he was responsible for getting rid of the vice president with Nixon. And he had said to me at that time, I knew
I knew both these guys when I was 16. And he said, break your engagement and marry me. And I said, no, you are a very angry man. And I'm not going to live with an angry man. But he was brilliant and charming and a lot of other things. And I read his obituary 52 years ago. So I knew what happened to him. And then there was a guy who took me to my sweet 16 and prom. And my granddaughter was the one that went on the computer and looked him up. And we found his family. And he died about 10 years after that. I mean, think of those other possibilities. I still think about it. And we spoke to the children. And the son was very excited because I knew his father when he was in the army and he was 21 years old. And his mother met him like 10 years later. So nobody that he knew at that time knew him when I did. And I sent him some pictures that I had. But I said to him, tell me about your grandmother. And he said she was terrible. And she was terrible to my mother. She was not a good grandmother to us, and she was terrible to my mother. And I said she was a deal breaker. So look how lucky I was all those years. And I didn't know how that book was going to end, but somehow there was a feeling, which I tell my children many times, many choices you make, some of them are with thinking and try to make correct choices. And the other is luck. And luck, I do not discount. There's a lot of luck in things that happen. And I feel, of course, very lucky to be here right now.
You know, I think that a lot of time, I think probably the thing that people think about most when they read the Midnight Library is the choices that they would have made in the love area.
Mhm.
I anyone who read this that didn't think about this, because there's always somebody else that you might have ended up with and that you might have whatever. And it's interesting. I had dated somebody who, it ended for one reason. It wasn't anything dramatic. It's just kind of like our lives went in different directions, and when it ended. And I thought I would think about it sometimes. Like, he was a kind guy, and it would have been a very nice life, very different life than I have, like, right now. I wonder what would have happened. So I look up the guy, and it turns out that he's only, I'm 50. The guy was only 2 years older than I am. He passed away of the same thing my mother passed away of, esophageal cancer. It's like the most random thing from two people who weren't smokers or any of the conditions that you would have. Very, very strange things. So it's like, you can't help but think when you hear things like that, you're like, oh my God, the choice that I made. I mean, my life would have been very different if that's who I had ended up with, and not in a way that I necessarily think that would have been good. So
Can I just say,
We have one.
can I just say one thing about this that we're all discounting is the force of personality. When if you would have made a different choice, all of us, than we did make, you cannot discount your own personality and how you can shape events. So, I know Buzzy talked about luck, but we make our luck by the path we set ourselves on. And if we would have, I threw out the business about you could marry 3 people, but any choice in your life is going to be affected by what you are, your personality. And in the end, I think that's what Matt Haig is saying. Her personality led her back to her root life.
Yeah,
and she
perception of events, and your perception of the events of life also is a big part of it. I agree with you. I think that is what led her back to her root life, and probably what leads most of us back to our root life. What I wanted to bring up was one of the parts of the book that deeply affected me personally was the chapter about Nora wanting to live again as a good cat owner, because it seemed like simple, like little, like, wow, this is from her book of regrets. Remember, they had the book of regrets. And when the cat was named Voltaire, interestingly enough, to go with the philosophy thing, because we know she loved philosophy. But when she enters that life, she finds Voltaire under the bed and he's dead. Do you guys remember this? She wants to be a good cat owner, thinks that she wasn't, because the cat had gone outside and died and gotten hit. And she thought it was her fault, and that she was a bad owner. And if he had been, more of an indoor cat, so she wants to live it again and go back to when he was fine. And she finds the cat dead under the bed.
Whoops.
Immediately passes out of that life. And Mrs. Elm explains to her that the cat had a heart condition, and his best life actually was with Nora. He hadn't died in the car accident in her root life as she had thought. He knew he was going to die, and he went outside to be alone in death, as animals often do. And it made me think about how the perception of events is totally different than somebody else's who was experiencing the same event with me. So, to her, she thought she's a bad cat owner and this and that. But, according to Mrs. Elm, this was the best thing that ever happened to the cat's life. And, we don't often think about that because we're sort of the center of our own, worlds. But we're touching everybody else's life, and how their lives are affected and how they experience the same set of events can be totally different than how you experience it. Which one of Nora's life stories made you think about things like this? Which one has affected you or stood out?
Mrs. Schneider, did you have a comment or question before?
Oh, before we get to that, I was thinking, Tracy, I was remembering Robert Frost's wonderful poem that when he's on that horse and he's going through the woods on a snowy evening, and the road could go to the right or the road could go to the left. And that moment is when we make choices. And all through our lives, we're doing that. Are we going to the right or to the left? But sometimes you can look at this book in a whole nother way and take it on more of a science fiction, that maybe, I don't know if you go for this kind of stuff, that while we're living these different possibilities, but maybe we are living at them. Maybe there are parallel lives and parallel universes out there where we made different choices. We didn't go to the right, we went to the left. And we are living that it could be in a scientific theme, science fiction, of course, but we never know, that there are parallel universes out there, and that we could be having a whole life, as we're speaking now, with other choices, that when we took the ride with the horse, that we went to the right, and that they're parallel, and we don't even realize it. Isn't that a cool way to look at this book?
It is. And it actually, before we get even into the other thing with the other lives, you just brought up something, Mrs. Schneider, that I think it was actually one of my questions further down. And it was the idea of parallel universes. I think that idea is extremely interesting. And I've always been fascinated by the idea of it, that we could simultaneously be in different lives. And it also depends on how you look at time, and is it a continuum? There are like all these things that go with it. But do any of you believe in a thing like parallel lives, or have even thought about it at all? We know Mrs. Schneider has, because she brought it up and I didn't even ask the question. Any of you know versus
Mrs.
for you?
Zoto? You're up, Mrs. Zoto. Yep.
I never thought in terms of parallel lives, but I do think that your soul comes back. And that I know I met my husband at 18, and the minute I met him, I knew he was my soulmate. And we've been connected so deeply ever since, through a lot of negative things that my parents were against and his parents were against, and we fought through it.
Wow. That's romantic and amazing, actually. Does anyone, I don't know, remember, I can't see all of you on there. I don't know if you want to keep talking about parallel universes or if we want to go back to are there any stories in this that Nora had that made you, because it's strange that you think that short chapter about the cat wouldn't have such a profound impact on me, but it really did. You know, it's the idea of how two people, obviously you aren't experiencing and perceiving something in the same way. You could have an experience and think it was terrible, and somebody else could have that same exact experience alongside of you and think it was great. And you know, you don't know. Are there any stories in here that affected you in that way? Or made life differently?
Anybody, Mrs. Fetter, anybody else? Just raise your hand. I can see everybody.
Okay.
All right. So Mrs. Fetter?
I thought he wrote it that way. When he talked about her being very famous, and she thought being famous was going to be a wonderful thing, and all the drawbacks of being famous, which I always think about, starting with the Kennedys. I mean, who was more famous, more gorgeous, more brilliant, a family, and more tragic? And so it didn't give them anything. It didn't give them all the wonderful things that they probably would have wanted, a comfortable home and quiet, loving atmosphere, which we get. And maybe we don't even appreciate it as much because other things look better. So he wrote each one that way. It was very, very cold, and yet she wanted to be there because it was a place to do scientific study, but boy, it was miserable, and she was cold, and all the bad things that could happen. Each story had two sides to it when he wrote it. And I think I saw that as the parallel life maybe, or the different life that he presents to us. And eventually she says, none of them were really better than what I actually have. And she looked at what she actually had differently, maybe rose-colored glasses, maybe less darkness, whatever it was. She calmed down and was comfortable.
Sorry, go on.
I would just like to say that this was a problem for me with this book. This book did not speak to me. The one thing that everybody talks about, the choice of going right or left, nobody talks about the road straight ahead. And I find that because that is a choice, that is a definite choice. You know, this idea of parallel lives is almost verging on New Age religion. And, you know, I can see why younger people would be absolutely intrigued by all of this. But I read this book and I recognized, you know, in psychotherapy, when people are very distressed, emotionally distressed, depending on circumstances, it's sometimes recommended that they get a pet. The idea is that if they can take care of something for a long time, keep that pet healthy, it brings them out of their own state of mind. Because you know, when you own a pet, you have to take care of the pet. So in Nora's case, the pet died and she's full of remorse. Now, having read a little bit about Matt Haig's background and his suicidal tendency, you kind of understand a world that he's describing of complete hopelessness. And that's what the cat's death represents. Whether there was a parallel life going on to this, I don't know. Now, I'm probably the only one here who didn't care for the book, but I would, because it doesn't speak to me. It really, you know, even though I can appreciate all of the different nuances of it and realize, as I said earlier, that you can read it on so many different levels and you can understand why he's an acclaimed author. I wouldn't have, if it wouldn't have been for this book club, I wouldn't have chosen it anyway,
Yeah,
for
Yeah,
whatever it's
Mrs.
worth.
Levitin, Mrs.
I
Levitin,
understand.
I kind of agree with you. I like the premise, the summary that, when we talked about this book originally, I was like, oh yeah, I love time travel and I love all this, like the what ifs. And then I'm like reading the book and I love happy endings. And I like wanted to have in one of these scenarios, I wanted her to find that other road that she could leave the life that she was unhappy with and find a road that she missed and then be able to live that. That's the type of person I am. I think about my life all the time and what it would be. Um, and I really, I guess for me, all these, it was a little depressing to find that all her lives, I'm like, oh, she didn't want to be rich and famous. She could fix that. But
I think
yeah, so I understand what you mean that I was like waiting for that,
it
I'm like,
did have a happy ending. She
it
decided.
did, but it wasn't like she found her, like she had that opportunity to go back and live her life, and we all think that, and it's like, oh, yep, it's her own life that she has to live out. That's the one
But
that she was
that's
chosen.
that's because that's the perception that you had of her life.
Yeah,
See, she actually says that she got the choice in that book of
yeah,
which one, where it gets, that's the little fantasy part, right? Because obviously this can't happen in real life. You don't get to go back and have do-overs and live your life and hop into other lives. I mean, it's a very interesting idea, but obviously you don't get to do that in real life. But he uses that as a way of showing, like in the case of her, that when her, if you remember in the book, you may not remember this, but in the book, there was a book of regrets. And as the book went on, the book of regrets got smaller and smaller because as she went back and looked at it, she realized why she made those choices. So, for example, there was, Dan, the one that she's engaged to. She was engaged to him and they broke up, and why, Dan was so great. So she's remembering, which a lot of us do this too. You idealize a past situation and you may not remember something that's not good about it, especially if you're not all that happy at this moment. You might idealize something from the past. But when she got her chance to go back to be with Dan, she realized that he was selfish. He was jealous. He wasn't allowing her to live her accomplishments and her life the way that she wanted to, and to move on from that. And she also realized that she was living a lot of her life not to please herself, but to please others. And she wasn't even giving herself the chance to see what might work for her. And those are the things that I actually thought. So that's where she got this whole, it's the perception of her life. Maybe my life really is good. And I think that no matter who you are, and no matter whether you're very happy in your life, you're unhappy in your life, you're sort of, we all go through phases, that anyone can benefit from the idea of really appreciating what it is that they have. That the idea that if you look at something a different way, that maybe you'll feel differently about it and feel happier. For me, the thing that what really struck me about this book wasn't, I felt like the science fiction and the fantasy was a vehicle for what was really the philosophical. It was really about the guiding principles of our book. And, obviously with any book, some people like it, some people don't like it. Sometimes a book resonates with you at a particular time, and another time it doesn't at all. And, and you don't like it, you don't know. That's what reading is about. It's a very personal experience. But for me, as was mentioned, I think Mrs. Schneider mentioned, or maybe mentioned Mrs. Levitan. I think you did, the idea that it was a lot of different ways that you could look at this book. From the fantasy, you could really like latch onto that part, or really latch onto the science fiction. But to me, those were really vehicles for what's the guiding principle, of your life, and how you're going to, live that life, and what's going to go on for it. And that brings me to something else that I hope that this book made each of you think about. Nora discusses in this book, she discusses a lot about philosophy. It's important to her. And Thoreau is her favorite philosopher. And she says that she's always thought of life as an event that should be magnificent. And what she decides that she learns is that for her, and it's one method of, looking at life, she realizes through Thoreau and through her experiences that the point of life is life itself. I don't know if I would say that that's the point of life. That's what she comes to the conclusion of. And she determines through Thoreau that altering her perception of life is what one needs to do to feel happy. That's what her decision, which then presumably Matt Haig's the author, right? And he has had these problems in his life. That's the conclusion that he's come to, that if he's, and I think we've all heard this one a lot. It's, look at a situation, it's the way you, whatever. So that's the conclusion that she comes to, that if she alters her perception of life, then she can actually feel happy. And that we only know what we perceive. So what I want to know is, do any of you, do you agree with this as a philosophy of life and how you live your lives? Is that a paradigm for your life and a guiding principle? If not, what do you think is the purpose of life? That's a big question, but that's what this book does. What's the purpose of life, and how do you think, what is the principle guiding, what's the guiding paradigm for your life? So 2 difficult questions.
Yeah.
I would like to.
You're all over this one. I know you've got it. I know it.
No, I don't got it. But we are living in the laboratory of a pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And because I have a family member who is a doctor and who reports to me occasionally, I know, and it's reported in the news, and I imagine it's the same in the United States as in Canada, the level of depression has shot up.
Oh, yeah.
And I know people, when I speak to my friends, some of them, they are depressed. And it's the condition that we're living in. And I call it a laboratory because there are others who are managing really, really well, who have achieved. Now, when you're a senior and you arrive at a certain point in your life, you are maybe more settled in your mind. But for a lot of seniors, this is a very difficult moment. And what is the meaning of my life if I cannot get together with friends? If I have to worry when I go to the grocery store, and I don't have to, these are choices, all kinds of choices, which he's talking about. If I go to the grocery store, I could get COVID. So in a way, this book, it just occurred to me, you're asking this question. So what is the meaning of life? So there's this Darwin's theory, survival of the fittest. Now, if my husband were alive, he would be saying to me, Ruth, this is population control, COVID. Okay. He was a big believer in population control. I take another view of Darwin, and it's called adaptability, survival of those who can adapt. And that's really what life is about. I think we are meant to be, we're born to be happy. We aren't born to be sad. We can make ourselves sad. Life is hard. I mean, he raises a lot of questions about a life well lived. And each of us, personally, we have to answer that question ourselves. Nobody can give you that answer. But how do you survive in the world, the coming world that, we're going to be living in this laboratory for a very long time. Mm-hmm. And so you're asking questions that don't really have an answer in my, personally, there are answers, but globally for people, each one has to find that answer themselves.
I think so, just answer, you did answer it though, in terms of yourself, and something that it definitely gives me something to think about, that one of the one of the principal guides for living a life well lived is the ability to adapt. I mean, nobody thought that something like, I mean, did anyone here ever think in their lifetime that they'd be living through a pandemic where they would be, it's like the 1918 flu, influenza epidemic. I mean, whoever thought that they would be doing this, walking around with masks and, afraid that they're going to catch this disease. It's just not something I think any of us thought that we were ever going to experience. And every single person has to do things differently now in their lives. And if you can't adapt to it, it's very hard to move on for it. And the fact is that life is probably not going to be the same. It's still not the same, and it's probably not going to be for a very long time, if ever. It may have permanently changed the way we do things. And I think you said it. Mrs. Levitan. It's the ability. Life is about the ability to adapt to situations and what's going on. I think that's a very good guiding principle. I think.
Mrs. Newman, you had your hand up.
I did. I had a different take on what affected me about this book. First of all, you're absolutely correct. Perception. I tell my kids all the time, perception and your response to events matter more than anything else that can happen. Having said that, what struck me was the thousands and thousands of books that she was never going to look at and never occur to her because of all the things that happen to us that are, let's call them happenstance, or what comes to mind is the time that you're running out to wherever to run an errand and realize that you forgot your cell phone, and you come back in your house and you grab your cell phone and you go, and as you're driving you realize that you missed a car accident by seconds, and that had you not forgotten your cell phone, you would have could have been in this accident or could have been stuck in whatever. And that could be life altering. I mean, the things that could happen to us that don't, because of, the people who were going into on 9/11, the people who were late going into work, or had a doctor's appointment and weren't in the towers. I mean, all of those little, not decisions, but those little things that happen that cause something to change. I'm not going to go nuts on this, but part of me has a strong feeling that it isn't always happenstance, but there's someone like the librarian who made me leave my phone so that wouldn't happen to me, or my parents, rest their souls, who are not living, are making sure that, or helping guide me in a position that won't put me in danger, for example. There were so many books that were untouched, and so many decisions that you maybe not only you don't realize you're making, but maybe you aren't even making, they just happen. And I find that to be such a fascinating piece of this book.
I love that.
Mrs. Fetter, you had your hand up.
Cindy, that I think is luck when you made that choice as opposed to another choice. I don't say I love the book, but I thought it was a great book for a book talk. And it left you thinking about things. So I think it was a great choice in that respect. And I want to tell you that because of this book now, I was interested in it before, but now I am crazy. And if anybody knows, I want to work on protecting the vote. It isn't happiness we get, but the pursuit of happiness that the Constitution gives us. That's how we live our lives, in the pursuit of it. Whether you actually get it or not, it depends on you. Do you decide if you're happy or not? But I am berserk with what is happening now. And if get to me, I want to work on a committee. I don't know where to go. I've tried calling. And if there's anything that can be done, if we can do something in Glen Eagles, I'll start something. But beyond anything, we've got to protect the vote. That's what the book gave me, I'm telling you. What do you think?
I think it's interesting. That's the direction that you went in with it, that it made you that this book, that I think it says a great deal about any book that could make you feel as though you want to change something or do something differently in your life. That's one of the best things that reading a book or any type of, vehicle of, entertainment or something that you watch, anything can do for you. That reminds me, I want to ask a question based on that. Have any of you ever read a book? We know that this one, is the Midnight Library for her. That's made her want to do something differently. Have any of you read a book that so deeply affected you that it changed your life in some way, or made you do something, altered the course of your life, made you make a different decision about how to move forward as a result of that book? Because if it has for any of you, I want to read that book. That's going to be something pretty special.
I don't see any hands up. Anybody?
No one. You're thinking about.
I don't know. Oh, wait, Mrs. Zoto. Mrs. Zoto has her hand up. Okay.
Love it.
A little bit of my background. I was raised Roman Catholic, Irish Catholic. And when I was 19 years old, there was an author, Leon Uris. He also wrote a book, Trinity, but he also wrote a book, Mila 18, which about the Warsaw Ghetto and the uprising. I had heard, but never really knew that much about the Holocaust. That started a passion in me to study the Holocaust that has followed all my life. And especially now that I'm older and retired, it's a passion that I have, that I've studied so much. And I really feel that I've been put on this earth to be a bridge between people.
Wow, I love that so much. I can't even believe it. And you know what? Maybe you'll really like next month's book then, because it is a Holocaust one that
I've already read it years ago.
Yeah.
When we moved from our home, I was in rehab for back surgery, and settlement was very fast. And I begged my husband, do not throw away my Holocaust books. And they were in 17 cartons. And it took me a while to find somebody that would take them. And they finally went to Stockton University. And all my books were taken there. So that is my passion that came from something.
Wow, I love that. Many years ago, I read it was Benjamin Button. They also made it into a movie, A Curious Life of Benjamin Button. It started out as a short story, and I had read that first. That one deeply affected me, because it was the idea of living your life, that there is no order, because he aged backwards. That's the essential thing about it, that he has aged backwards. He did things sort of in a different order than people expect life to be, or how you live your life. And it affected me in that way, because I realized that it didn't matter how old I was. I could change my life at any time if I wanted to, do things differently and go a totally different course, that it would be hard and scary to do it, but that I could do it. And I did it because of that. I actually moved to Florida. I did this 10 years ago because of that idea. That was what did it. That was what it really spurred it on. So it's very interesting, but books, and that it really can do that for you. It'll give you a whole different direction, whether it's something that you want to do in terms of work that's different, a totally different interest in your life. So if it's Holocaust studies and you want to get more involved in that, causes you want to get involved in, it's very interesting that that books and stories can do that. And it has happened for me. And I'm glad to hear that it's happened for some of you as well. I wanted to tell you guys that the Midnight Library, husband Mike
There you go.
Caruso, who's altered his life and becoming a state representative for the state of Florida. Like no money, I should point out that too. So it really does alter your life. All good. He's got something to say about it.
Hi, everybody. Hope you're enjoying
the Midnight Library.
The Midnight Library.
So what I wanted to tell you guys is that the Midnight Library actually has been optioned into a movie. I did this last time with Clara and the Sun. I pointed that out to you. So I wanted to tell you the Midnight Library has been optioned to a movie. I think it's going to be very difficult to make it because it's going to be very interesting to see what direction they take of it. Is it going to be more about the mystical? Is it going to be more about the science fiction and fantasy? Is it going to be more about the philosophy, or is it going to seem less mystical? Is it going to be more feeling more real? So it's going to be interesting to see how they go. And what I want to ask all of you, or some of you, because I know somebody's going to have an answer, who would play Nora Seed in the movie? The main character, who would play her? They don't have anyone yet. I'm asking who any of you picture as Nora Seed.
Probably, I saw Gwyneth Paltrow in Sliding Doors, which is sort of the same idea, except it isn't. I mean, it's not about a library, but it's this thing of
lives. It is very much. That's a great.
And, she has that look about her. I happen to think she's a wonderful actress. And I think I could see her doing it. Her body shape, just the whole look, the blonde look. You could see her as famous, as a musician. I don't know what, she popped into my mind. Interesting, huh?
I love it. I love it. Anyone else have any ideas of who would be Nora Seed?
How about no? You know what? I thought Renee Zellweger, but then again, I can't see her as a as a singer or anything like that. Plus,
How about Katherine Hagel?
Oh, I like her.
That's another one. It's a look. You have to, when they make movies, they go for the look.
True.
Yeah, but we also need someone a lot younger though too. We need someone like in her 30s.
You know what?
We need an up and coming actress.
Not blondish, which I guess, so think of you as blondish, but Anna Kendrick. Do you guys know this actress, Anna Kendrick? She was in a story. She's been in a lot of movies, but she was in a series that was on last year, Love Life, that was very interesting. It would go back and forth in her life over like a 10-year period, let's say. And it doesn't do it in sequence. So it's not like she's 20, 23, 20, whatever. It kind of goes from like, in 1 year she's 25, another one she's 15, and what happens. So you kind of get the idea of what happened. And then it ends up with her, who she ultimately ends up with. But you get an incredibly good idea of how it happened. And she was so versatile that I could really, yep, there's Anna Kendrick. So I could really see her. I could see her in it. She kind of plays, you can even see from all these pictures on here that she kind of plays like a lot of different types. Like she could be sweet and cute and innocent looking, or kind of sexy. So I could see her playing like a lot of different ones, but that's who went in my mind. That's who went.
Yeah. I just want to say, you have to remember also that this book was written by somebody who's British. And it's actually a very British novel. And I have seen, Gwyneth Paltrow. I'm really giving a plug for Gwyneth Paltrow. She does the British accent, an educated British accent very, very well.
She does.
She has the look. She just has that look. I'm really plugging her.
You better be in this movie. And now I'm going to be disappointed by whoever they pick. They picked the wrong person. Like, you picked the wrong person. I'm going to write to the author. If you have an influence on it, I'm going to say, you've got to do this.
I'm looking at young British authors, and they have the girl from Harry Potter.
Oh, I like her. That's right. Emma.
And there's some really nice, Google, everybody, Google young British actresses, and there's some
Look what's become of our book review.
Well, give you guys some other
We're going to be
recommendations
starting, we're going to be casting movie, actresses for these
That's
movies.
each time, because of the fact that they are doing this, that they're making it into a movie. It's like why not, why not speculate on it? It's they're doing it. But I wanted
What
to
about
just
Kristen Stewart?
I
What
like
about
her.
Kristen Stewart?
I like her too. And she's had every color hair under the rainbow, so she can pull off anything. She'd be So I've got some other recommendations for you guys if you like this book. In terms of a movie, Sliding Doors is excellent with Gwyneth Paltrow. I love that movie. I've got to see it again. I don't know if any of you have read Before the Coffee Gets Cold. If any of you have heard of that, it's a very interesting story about the idea. It's not exactly like this, but it's the idea somebody goes into a coffee shop and they're waiting there, and before the coffee gets cold, they have a chance to kind of right a wrong in their life. So it's also it's short, original by a Japanese author, and it was very good. I read another one that was called Una Out of Order. Also great, goes back into her life and the different kinds of things, and has sort of a time travel-y element. Another one called The Immortalists, The 7.5 Deaths of Evelyn Hardcastle. And one that we almost read for this book club, but the reason why I didn't choose it is because I wanted this one instead. It was called Life After Life by Kate Atkinson. But it explores a lot of the same, it's not this book. I don't want you to think any of these things are identical. They're not, but it explores the same kind of themes.
And I
And
have that book that Tracy gave me a long time ago. It's a big, thick one.
yeah, a really, really big book, which was part
But
of it all. I try not, I guys with books that are so long, because especially, it's great if you like them, it's great. But if you hate it, you're going to be like, I can't believe she gave me a 100-page book to read. So
I have it in my office if anybody wants to read that one. That was one of the best ones that Tracy gave to me, was that, because I love time travel. I'm obsessed with all that.
glad you like it, Tammy. And in terms of a show, actually, I think a lot of people in this group would really like the show. If you have Netflix, there is a show. There's only been one season of it. Season 2 got postponed because of COVID, but they're going to do it. But it's called Russian Doll, and it's with Natasha Lyonne. And that is, she does things over and over again. It's got that kind of Groundhog Day element, but there's nothing, it's not funny or comical or anything like that. It's more, it's why is this happening? How can she fix it? How does this go on? And it's got I'm sure a lot of you are New Yorkers. It's got a New York element to it. There's certain interesting things that have a Jewish element to it. It's a very interesting show, and I think it's probably one of my favorites. So I would look into that one also. I think you'll find it to be fascinating. And that's our story for the Midnight Library. And the last thing I wanted to ask, and I know that Tammy wanted to talk about this too. We originally have our next club scheduled for December 17th, but I'm actually not going to be there.